It's time for another Flash video. So hey everyone. So every single time I compare two different timelines in a Flash video, referring to one of them as the original in comparison to the other one, of course, someone had to jump into the comments and remind me of how the original timeline is the one before season 1, where Nora Allen was never killed by the reverse Flash. But was there ever really an original timeline, like one where Nora Allen was never killed, one where Barry lives and grows up with his parents, pretty much one with the whole 9 Flashpoint yards? Well, there are two possible answers to this question, but before I get started on them, I'd like to quickly remind you of my Amazon gift card giveaway running through this week. All you've got to do to have a chance at winning is to be a subscriber and drop me a relevant comment down below. More information on the giveaway can be found in the pinned comment to this video. So like I just stated, there are two possible answers to the question of whether or not that specific original timeline existed. The first answer is yes, Eobard Thawne did state that much. After all, he did come from the future to erase Barry Allen from existence with the objective of making sure he never becomes the Flash. So originally in the comics, Thawne was a Flash fanboy, born centuries into the future where all he knew about Barry Allen is a matter of history and legend. Now at some point down the road, Thawne gets his hands on Barry's cosmic treadmill, which he uses to travel back in time in the hopes of meeting up with his role model. But the treadmill that hasn't been used in ages malfunctions, sending him into the past but only a few years after Barry died. Now it is during that trip to the past that he discovers that Barry Allen ends up killing him and that he's destined to become his nemesis rather than the prodigy of his that he wanted to become. And it is at that point and with this discovery that he goes from his fandom and worship of Barry Allen to completely hating him, turning evil, and becoming Barry's biggest enemy. Now this in return creates the comic book loop. Thawne loves Barry, Thawne hates Barry, Thawne goes bad, Thawne kills Nora, Thawne kills Iris, or presumably does. Thawne presumably plans on killing Fiona Webb, Barry snaps Thawne's neck, and so on and so forth. Now if I remember correctly, and I think I do, I don't recall Nora Allen ever being alive in any timeline in the comics but the Flashpoint timeline. On the show as well, there's no proof that there's a timeline where she was never killed, except if we do take Thawne's word for it. But then again, when we watch Eobard in flashbacks of the night he killed Barry's mother, he seems to be getting all of his information off of Gideon. And so far, Gideon has identified herself as a future creation of Barry's, which could be enough reason to create some doubt as to whether or not she was actually feeding Thawne the truth. It's possible that this whole situation was staged by Barry. I mean, a future Barry Allen could have made sure Gideon ends up in Thawne's hands and misinform him about everything he needed to know. That could as well have been Barry's way into pushing him into going back in time to kill him, only knowing that he would end up killing his mother instead. Now one thing that goes to give this possibility some weight is when Barry, Cisco, and Kaylin discovered the Time Vault for the very first time, Gideon did make it clear, and in a manner of speaking, that a Barry Allen command is top priority on her list. So what if Thawne was set up in such a way that he would do exactly what he did and maintain the integrity of the timeline the way it always had to exist? So I know that's not enough proof really, but I've come prepared with more. Now in the first season finale, when Barry goes back in time to save his mother, we see his future version, the one that followed Thawne, fought him in his childhood home, and ended up taking a kid Barry out of the equation and saving him. But that was not all, was it? Before he actually saved his younger self, he did signal our Barry to not go ahead and save his mother, to hold any plans he made for saving Nora Allen. Now over the course of the year that followed, I kept asking myself the question of why he did so. Then the third season premiere happened, and I got my answer. Flashpoint. That version of Barry pretty much wanted to stop his younger self from making that one big mistake of creating this alternate timeline in which his mother never died, something that he probably experienced himself. He kind of wanted to make sure that his younger self never restored the original timeline, which if you think about, doesn't really make all that much sense. Like why would he want to keep the integrity of a messed up, forced timeline and erase an original timeline where his life was supposedly perfect? I personally don't see any reason unless that timeline was never meant to exist, unless that timeline was an aberration of sorts, a flashpoint. And if my theory was actually wrong and there was an original timeline where Nora Allen lived a long happy life, why would Flashpoint be such a bad idea? Why would Barry be sort of punished for it by going into the Speed Force at the very end of the third season if it was the original timeline and all he did was restore everything back to the way things were supposed to be? Doesn't sound like enough proof, does it? Alright, so take the 11th episode of the second season where Eobard responds to Barry's "You died" with "I know what time period you're from, so that means very soon you'll die." That pretty much tells us one thing. Eobard didn't have all the information he needed. He's met the Flash in the future, they took jabs at one another, but he never actually had enough information on him. Now, besides that, possibly supporting the theory Gideon might have been feeding him wrong information, it also goes to prove he's kind of ignorant of precise Flash history. That would necessarily mean that he might not realize he's about to do what he's supposed to do anyway. But besides that, we know Eobard's future self is all about idolizing Barry, as he did state it loud and clear on that very same episode I just mentioned moments ago. He does tell Barry that he was obsessed by him, that for so many years he wanted to be him, try to figure out how Barry got his speed in the first place so he could do just that, and that he duplicated the reaction that made Barry the Flash, and it worked. He also tells him that when he traveled through time, he realized that his fate was never to become the Flash, but rather to become his biggest enemy, hence becoming the reverse of everything Barry is. Now that part is pretty much hit by the comic book story of the Reverse Flash, aka Professor Zoom. So while he might not have mentioned how he came to realize he was Barry's biggest enemy, nothing about his very own death at the hands of Barry, there are two things that go to prove this is part of the mythology of the show. The first is Barry's vision of being in jail on the first season finale, and as he ran through the Speed Force, seems like it's some sort of variation on Trial of the Flash. Number two, Thawne's reaction to Barry's "you died" on the 11th episode of the second season wasn't one of surprise, and I assume he had no clue about his other death on the first season. But that as well raises a couple of very important questions. Could it be that everything else is by the book? Would that as well go to support the idea that Gideon might have been misleading him all the way? Would that mean that he was always destined to kill Nora Allen, and that there is no original timeline, as we might have assumed? So if you're not convinced the original timeline might not exist, I've got one final thing to try and prove it. On the flashbacks to the night of Nora's murder on the first season, Thawne seemed to have lost his speed and ability to time travel. Now Gideon went to explain that by telling him that his latest time jump against the Flash caused a massive drain on his powers, that his abilities to travel at super speed and travel through time have been completely depleted. So they weren't really lost. It wasn't all caused by changing Barry's future, but it was all a product of his time jump against Barry, as she indicated. But considering I made the assumption that Gideon might have been misleading him in general, I cannot really use the opposite as an argument here unless I have something to back my claim up. I actually do, cause this is not the only time he got stuck in the past in this manner. So in episode 11 of season 2, he tries to get the tachyons off of Christina McGee to make sure he could go back in time. When she makes the remark about another man in a yellow suit trying to steal them a year before, he makes the comment about how he must have been stuck here once before and wasn't able to access the Speed Force. But one of the biggest questions here is, if Eobard Thawne changed the timeline so Barry never becomes the Flash by killing his mother, wouldn't that be his very own Flashpoint? Wouldn't memories start bleeding out of him the way they did for Barry during his stay in the Flashpoint timeline? I mean, Barry stayed there for a few months, and Thawne stayed in what we assumed was his new timeline for a whole bunch of years. He did, after all, have to wait 3 years of Barry growing up before he created the particle accelerator explosion that would turn Barry into the Flash. But besides that, wouldn't Thawne have lost his speed for other reasons, cause and effect maybe? He did, after all, become what he is, as indicated on the second season, because of his idolizing Barry and wanting to mimic his abilities to walk in his footsteps and become a hero. So it would kind of make perfect sense that with the future of Barry changed and being Flashless, Eobard would lose his speed for good, rather than because of a mishap during his fight with the Flash. But credit where credit is due, this whole theory was inspired by a conversation with Reverse Führer, even though I had to do a lot of work to get it out in a different form. Now I did actually reject the theory when he first approached me with it because it didn't make much sense to me. He does have a video uploaded on the topic and you'll find it credited in the description below. I know that Wars 2 as well did a video on it that I haven't watched yet, but I'm pretty sure Reverse Führer was the inspiration there as well. But with that being said, do let me know in the comments what you thought of this theory, if you agree with me, if it does make sense to you, or if you at least think it is a possibility. And remember, your likes and subscribes are much appreciated. Finally, don't forget to enable the bell-shaped icon underneath this video so you would get informed of my new videos as they come online. But until I see you next, thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.